Let me tell you about the phone call that broke my heart. My son called me sobbing, saying his wife had just miscarried their first baby. I rushed over to comfort them both, brought food, stayed for days helping them grieve. Then, a week later, I was scrolling through social media and saw his wife's best friend had posted photos from a gender reveal party that same week, and there was my daughter-in-law, very pregnant, celebrating her baby boy. Some lies are so cruel they destroy families from the inside out. Before I tell you about the lie that shattered my trust in my daughter-in-law, I need to tell you about my son Kevin and how desperate he was to become a father, because understanding his vulnerability makes what his wife did to him even more heartbreaking. Kevin was my second son, born between Marcus and Trevor. Where Marcus was serious and studious and Trevor was charming and social, Kevin was the sensitive dreamer of the family. He loved children from the time he was a child himself. He was the neighborhood babysitter as a teenager, the one who volunteered at summer camps, the uncle who got down on the floor to play with his nephews and nieces for hours. Kevin had always talked about becoming a father someday. He said it was what he looked forward to most in life. He described the kind of dad he wanted to be, patient and present and playful. He'd talk about teaching his kids to ride bikes and helping with homework and being there for every milestone. My husband Henry and I used to joke that Kevin was more excited about becoming a parent than about any career or other life goal. He went into elementary education because he loved working with children, became a fourth-grade teacher who was beloved by students and parents alike. When Kevin was 28, he met a woman named Vanessa at a friend's wedding. Vanessa was 26, beautiful and vivacious, working in pharmaceutical sales. She had that kind of confidence and polish that made everyone notice when she walked into a room. Kevin was immediately smitten. He brought Vanessa to meet me after their third date, which was unusual for him since he was normally cautious about introducing women to family. But he said he knew Vanessa was special, that he could see a future with her. I'll be honest, honey. From that first meeting, something about Vanessa unsettled me. She was charming and said all the right things, but there was a calculation behind her smile. She watched people carefully, seemed to be constantly assessing how to present herself, what to say to get the reaction she wanted. But Kevin was so happy, so hopeful, that I pushed my concerns aside. I told myself I was being overprotective, that I needed to trust my son's judgment about his own relationships. Kevin and Vanessa dated for a year before he proposed. He was thrilled when she said yes. He told me that Vanessa shared his dreams of having a big family, that she wanted children just as much as he did. He said they'd talked about it extensively and were completely aligned on their future. The wedding was lovely, though I noticed Vanessa spent most of the reception networking with guests who might be useful to her career rather than celebrating with Kevin's family and friends. But Kevin didn't seem to notice or mind. He was just happy to be married to the woman he loved. After the wedding, Kevin would call me regularly with updates about their efforts to start a family. He and Vanessa had decided not to wait to have children. Kevin was 30, Vanessa was 28, and they both wanted to be young parents. Kevin talked about converting the spare bedroom into a nursery, about baby names they were considering, about the kind of parents they'd be. 6 months passed, then a year, with no pregnancy. Kevin tried to stay optimistic, saying these things took time, that they just needed to be patient. But I could hear the disappointment in his voice with each passing month. At the 18-month mark, Kevin told me they'd started seeing a fertility specialist. The doctor had run tests and found no medical reason why Vanessa wasn't getting pregnant. Everything looked normal for both of them. The doctor suggested they keep trying naturally for another 6 months before considering any interventions. Kevin became increasingly anxious during this time. He'd call me upset after another negative pregnancy test, questioning whether he'd ever get to be a father. I'd try to reassure him that it would happen when the time was right, that he was still young and had plenty of time. But Kevin felt time slipping away. He'd see his friends becoming parents and feel left behind. He'd watch his students with their families and feel envious. His desire to be a father had become an obsession that overshadowed everything else in his life. Vanessa seemed less affected by the delays. When I'd ask her how she was handling the disappointment, she'd shrug and say they'd get pregnant eventually, that she wasn't worried. Her casual attitude struck me as odd given how desperately Kevin wanted children, but I figured people processed these things differently. Then, after 2 years of trying, Kevin called me with exciting news. Vanessa was finally pregnant. They'd confirmed it with the doctor. They were having a baby. Kevin was crying with joy on the phone. He said it was the happiest day of his life. He talked about how he'd been starting to lose hope, but now everything was perfect. He said Vanessa was glowing and excited, that they were already planning the nursery and buying baby books. I was thrilled for them, though I'll admit I was also relieved. Kevin had been so fixated on becoming a father that I'd worried about how he'd cope if it never happened. Now he'd finally get what he'd been dreaming of his entire life. Vanessa was about 8 weeks along when they told me. The doctor had said everything looked good, but that they should wait until after the first trimester to tell most people, since miscarriages were more common in the early weeks. Kevin said they'd only told immediate family and close friends. I offered to throw Vanessa a baby shower once they were past the dangerous first trimester. Kevin said Vanessa would love that she was already excited about celebrating the baby with everyone. He sent me ultrasound photos that showed a tiny blob that would become my grandchild. Over the next few weeks, Kevin called regularly with updates. He said Vanessa was experiencing morning sickness, which was apparently a good sign that the pregnancy was progressing normally. He said she was already showing a little, that he loved seeing her body change. He was reading pregnancy books and preparing to be the best father possible. Then came the phone call that I thought would break Kevin forever. It was a Tuesday morning, and I was getting ready for work when my phone rang. Kevin's name appeared on the screen. When I answered, I heard sobbing so intense that at first I couldn't understand what he was saying. Through the tears, Kevin told me that Vanessa had miscarried. She'd woken up that morning with cramping and bleeding. They'd rushed to the hospital, but it was too late. The baby was gone. They were at about 11 weeks along, just short of the safer second trimester. Kevin was devastated beyond anything I'd ever heard from him. He kept saying he couldn't believe it, that they'd been so close to making it to the safe zone, that he'd already loved that baby so much. He said Vanessa was physically okay but emotionally destroyed. He said they were both just trying to process what had happened. I told Kevin I'd come over immediately. He said yes please, that they needed family support. I called my work and told them I had a family emergency, then drove to Kevin and Vanessa's house with my heart breaking for them. When I arrived, Kevin answered the door looking absolutely shattered. His eyes were red and swollen from crying. He looked like he hadn't slept. He fell into my arms and sobbed like he had when he was a little boy. Vanessa was on the couch, looking pale and tired. She had a blanket wrapped around her and was holding a pillow to her stomach. When she saw me, she started crying too, saying she was so sorry, that she'd failed Kevin, that she couldn't believe they'd lost the baby. I spent that first day just being present with them. I made food that mostly went uneaten. I listened to Kevin talk about all the plans he'd had for the baby, all the dreams that had just died. I held Vanessa while she cried about the physical and emotional pain of miscarriage. The grief in that house was overwhelming. Kevin couldn't stop crying. He'd look at the ultrasound photos on the refrigerator and break down. He'd walk past the spare bedroom where they'd been planning the nursery and have to leave the house because the pain was too intense. Vanessa seemed to be grieving too, though her grief manifested differently. She was quieter, more withdrawn. She'd cry occasionally, but mostly just stared at the television without really watching it. She said she felt empty and broken. I stayed with them for 3 days, sleeping on their couch, cooking meals they barely touched, just being there as a presence of support and love. Kevin's brothers came by to check on him. Friends brought food and cards. Everyone rallied around them during this terrible loss. Kevin told me he didn't know how to move forward. He said he'd been so close to becoming a father, and now that dream felt further away than ever. He said he was terrified to try again, afraid of experiencing this pain another time, but he also said he couldn't give up on becoming a father, that it still mattered too much to him. I encouraged Kevin and Vanessa to consider grief counseling, to find healthy ways to process this loss together. They both agreed it was a good idea. Kevin scheduled an appointment with a therapist who specialized in pregnancy loss. After those first 3 days, I went back home but called Kevin multiple times daily to check on him. He sounded a little better each day, or at least a little more functional. He said he was going back to work the following week, that he needed the distraction and routine. He said Vanessa was taking more time off to physically recover. Over the next week, I sent care packages to their house: comfort food, grief books, a journal for processing emotions. I wanted them to know they weren't alone in their pain. About a week and a half after the miscarriage, I was at home one evening scrolling through social media. I didn't use Facebook or Instagram much, but occasionally I'd browse to see photos of family and friends. I was looking through my feed when I saw a post from someone named Jennifer Chen. The name wasn't immediately familiar, but when I clicked on the profile, I saw she was friends with Vanessa. The profile photo showed a woman about Vanessa's age, and many of the photos on her page included Vanessa. Jennifer had posted an album from earlier that week with the caption celebrating her best friend's gender reveal party. The album was public, visible to anyone who stumbled across it. I almost scrolled past it, assuming it was about someone else's pregnancy. But something made me click on the album to see the photos. The first photo showed a group of women at what looked like a restaurant private room, with blue balloons and decorations everywhere. I scanned the faces in the photo, and there, right in the center, was Vanessa. Vanessa, who had supposedly miscarried a week and a half earlier, was standing in the middle of a gender reveal party, laughing and holding a glass of what looked like champagne. And honey, she was very visibly pregnant. Her dress was form-fitting, showing off a prominent baby bump that couldn't possibly be faked. I stared at the photo, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. Maybe this was an old photo that Jennifer had just posted? But no, the date stamp on the post said it had been taken just 3 days ago. 3 days after Kevin had told me about the miscarriage. I scrolled through the rest of the album. Photo after photo showed Vanessa at this gender reveal party, smiling and celebrating. In one photo, she was holding a cake that had been cut open to reveal blue frosting inside. In another, she was laughing with friends while holding blue confetti. In another, she was posing with one hand on her very pregnant belly. The caption on one photo read, "Celebrating baby boy Chen Morrison arriving in 4 months." Vanessa's last name was Morrison. This was definitely Vanessa's gender reveal party. My hands were shaking as I processed what I was seeing. Kevin had told me Vanessa miscarried. I'd spent 3 days at their house consoling them both over the loss of their baby. I'd watched my son grieve more deeply than I'd ever seen him grieve anything. But here was Vanessa, very pregnant, celebrating her baby boy at a gender reveal party just days after supposedly losing that baby. Unless Vanessa had been pregnant with twins and only lost one, but that seemed unlikely, and surely Kevin would have mentioned that. Plus, the timing didn't work. Vanessa had been 11 weeks along when she supposedly miscarried. The caption said the baby was arriving in 4 months, which would mean Vanessa was about 5 months pregnant, not 11 weeks. I looked at the photo, metadata, and post details. The party had taken place the same Tuesday that Kevin had called me crying about the miscarriage. While Kevin was sobbing about losing his baby, Vanessa had been at a gender reveal party celebrating that same pregnancy. The realization hit me like a physical blow. Vanessa had lied. There had been no miscarriage. She was still pregnant, had been pregnant all along, and for some reason had convinced Kevin that she'd lost the baby. But why would anyone do that? Why would a woman lie to her husband about miscarrying when she was actually still pregnant? It made no sense. Unless Vanessa had a reason to want Kevin to think the baby was gone. I sat with my phone in my hands, staring at these photos, trying to understand what was happening. Part of me wanted to believe there was some explanation I wasn't seeing, some reasonable answer that would make this make sense. But I couldn't think of any explanation that fit. The photos were clear. Vanessa was very pregnant. The party had happened the same day Kevin thought she miscarried, and she was celebrating a baby boy arriving in a few months. I needed to talk to Kevin, but I didn't know how to approach this. If I was right, if Vanessa had lied about the miscarriage, then I was about to tell my son something that would devastate him in an entirely different way than losing a baby had. I took screenshots of all the photos from Jennifer's album, just in case the post got deleted or made private. Then I called Kevin. He answered on the third ring, sounding tired but not as destroyed as he'd sounded in recent days. He asked how I was doing. I said I was okay, but that I needed to talk to him about something important. Could I come over? Kevin said Vanessa was out with a friend that evening, so it was just him at home. I could come by if I wanted. He sounded curious about what I needed to discuss, but not alarmed. I drove to Kevin's house with my phone full of screenshots and my heart full of dread. When Kevin answered the door, he looked better than he had a week and a half ago. Still sad, but more like someone who was starting to process grief, rather than someone drowning in it. We sat in his living room, and I asked him how he was really doing. Kevin said it was getting a little easier each day. He said the grief counselor he'd seen had helped him understand that pregnancy loss was common and didn't mean he'd never be a father. He said he and Vanessa were going to try again once she'd physically recovered, probably in a couple of months. I asked how Vanessa was doing. Kevin said she seemed to be healing physically and emotionally. She was still sad, but she was getting out of the house more, seeing friends, trying to return to normal life. He said she'd been out with her best friend Jennifer several times this week, which he thought was healthy. Jennifer, the woman who'd posted the gender reveal photos. I pulled out my phone and opened the screenshots I'd taken. I asked Kevin if he knew Jennifer Chen. He said yes. She was Vanessa's closest friend from college. They were still very close. I handed him my phone showing the first photo from the gender reveal party. I watched Kevin's face as he looked at it. Confusion first, then his eyes scanning the image, then focusing on Vanessa in the center of the group. Kevin asked what he was looking at. I told him it was a post from Jennifer's Facebook page, from a gender reveal party that had happened 3 days ago. The same Tuesday that Kevin had told me about the miscarriage. Kevin stared at the photo. He zoomed in on Vanessa, looking at her face, her dress, her very visible pregnant belly. He said there must be some mistake. Maybe it was an old photo. Maybe Jennifer had posted something from months ago. I showed him the date stamp on the post. I showed him the captions talking about a baby arriving in 4 months. I scrolled through the other photos, showing him multiple angles of Vanessa at this party, clearly pregnant, clearly celebrating. Kevin's hands started shaking. He said he didn't understand what he was looking at. This couldn't be recent. Vanessa had miscarried. They'd been to the hospital. She'd had cramping and bleeding. The doctor had confirmed the pregnancy was lost. I asked Kevin if he'd actually spoken to a doctor himself, or if Vanessa had told him what the doctor said. Kevin went very still. He said Vanessa had gone to the hospital emergency room while he was at work. By the time he got there, she'd already been examined and discharged. The medical staff couldn't discuss details with him due to privacy laws, but Vanessa had told him everything the doctor had said. Kevin had taken Vanessa's word for what happened because why wouldn't he? She was his wife. Why would she lie about something like that? But sitting in his living room, looking at photos of his very pregnant wife at a gender reveal party, Kevin had to confront the possibility that Vanessa had lied about the miscarriage. Kevin started looking through his phone. He pulled up his insurance app to check recent claims. There was no claim from the emergency room visit Vanessa said she'd made. No record of any hospital visit at all on the day she'd supposedly miscarried. Kevin's face was pale. He asked why Vanessa would do this. Why would she lie about losing their baby? What possible reason could she have? I said I didn't know, but that we needed to find out the truth. Kevin needed to talk to Vanessa directly and demand an explanation. Kevin said Vanessa was out with Jennifer right now, out with the friend who'd hosted the gender reveal party. He wondered if Jennifer knew about the fake miscarriage. He wondered how many people knew that Vanessa had lied to him. I suggested Kevin text Vanessa and ask her to come home, that there was something they needed to discuss. Kevin did so, keeping his message neutral, not wanting to give Vanessa warning about what he'd discovered. Vanessa replied that she'd be home in about 30 minutes. Kevin and I sat in tense silence, both of us trying to understand what was happening and why. When Vanessa arrived home, she walked in smiling, looking relaxed and happy. She greeted me with surprise, asking what I was doing there. Before she could say anything else, Kevin held up his phone showing the gender reveal photos. Vanessa's smile disappeared instantly. Her face went pale, then red. She looked at Kevin, then at me, then back at Kevin. She started to say something, then stopped. Kevin asked her directly whether she was still pregnant. Vanessa looked like she was considering lying again, but then something in her expression changed, a kind of resignation or defeat. She said yes, she was still pregnant. There had been no miscarriage. Kevin asked why. Why had she lied to him? Why had she put him through the grief of losing a baby that wasn't actually lost? Why had she let him suffer when she was fine and the baby was fine? Vanessa sat down, and what she said next explained everything while somehow making it even worse. She said she'd lied about the miscarriage because she didn't want Kevin involved in the pregnancy or the baby's life. She said she'd realized after getting pregnant that she'd made a mistake marrying Kevin, that she wanted out of the marriage, but she also wanted to keep the baby. If she'd asked Kevin for a divorce while pregnant, he would have wanted joint custody. He would have been involved in their child's life forever. Vanessa didn't want that. She wanted to raise the baby on her own, or rather, with someone else. Vanessa admitted she'd been having an affair for the past year with a man she'd met through work. His name was Derek, and he was wealthy and ambitious and everything Vanessa wanted in a partner. Derek knew about the pregnancy and wanted to raise the baby with Vanessa as his own. But Derek didn't want the complication of Vanessa being married to someone else, or of Kevin having parental rights to a baby that would be in Derek's life. So Vanessa and Derek had come up with a plan. Vanessa would fake a miscarriage, letting Kevin grieve the lost baby. Then, a few months later, she'd ask for a divorce, saying the miscarriage had made her realize their marriage wasn't working. Kevin would be heartbroken about the divorce, but would accept it eventually. Meanwhile, Vanessa would move in with Derek and continue the pregnancy in secret. Once the baby was born, they'd claim he was Derek's child conceived after her divorce. Kevin would never know he had a son. He'd never have any claim to the baby. Vanessa said the gender reveal party had been a mistake. She'd told Jennifer the plan, and Jennifer had agreed to help by hosting a private celebration. But Jennifer had posted photos publicly without thinking about privacy settings, and now the whole plan had fallen apart. Vanessa said she was sorry Kevin had found out this way, but that the truth was she didn't love him anymore and didn't want him to be a father to her child. She said she'd tried to do this in a way that would hurt him least, letting him grieve a miscarriage rather than know his wife had betrayed him and was planning to keep his child from him. Kevin sat there listening to this explanation, and I watched my son's face cycle through disbelief, grief, rage, and finally a kind of cold shock that scared me more than his earlier emotions had. He told Vanessa to get out of his house. She started to argue, to try to explain further, but Kevin cut her off. He said she'd lied about the most sacred thing two people could create together. She'd manipulated his grief. She'd planned to steal his child and give it to another man. He wanted her out immediately. Vanessa said they needed to talk about this rationally. Kevin said there was nothing to talk about. She'd already made all the decisions without him. Now he was making one. She needed to leave. Vanessa left, but not before saying that Kevin would regret this, that if he tried to fight her for custody, she'd make his life miserable. She said Derek had money for lawyers and would make sure Kevin never saw the baby. She said Kevin should just let her go and move on with his life. After Vanessa left, Kevin broke down completely, but this time, his grief was different. He wasn't just mourning a lost baby. He was mourning the betrayal of a wife who'd proven herself capable of unimaginable cruelty. He was mourning the year or more he'd spent being faithful to a woman who'd been cheating on him. He was mourning the loss of the future he'd envisioned. And he was terrified about what would happen with the baby. He said that was his child, his son, the baby he'd wanted his entire life. And his wife and her lover had planned to take that child away from him permanently, to let him believe the baby didn't exist while raising his son as someone else's. I helped Kevin contact a family law attorney that night. The attorney said what Vanessa had done was unconscionable and that Kevin had strong grounds to fight for custody rights. The attorney said they needed to act quickly to establish Kevin's paternity and legal rights before the baby was born. Over the next months, Kevin went through the most difficult time of his life. He filed for divorce from Vanessa, citing her adultery and fraud. He filed legal paperwork establishing his paternity of the unborn child and demanding joint custody after birth. Vanessa fought every step of the way. She claimed the baby might not be Kevin's, that she wasn't sure who the father was. Kevin demanded a paternity test, which Vanessa tried to block. The court ordered one anyway. When the baby was born, a healthy boy that Kevin desperately wanted to meet, Vanessa refused to let Kevin anywhere near the hospital. She'd named the baby Derek Jr., after her lover, giving him Derek's last name instead of Kevin's. The paternity test, conducted after birth, confirmed what Kevin had known all along. The baby was definitively his biological son. The court granted Kevin joint custody despite Vanessa and Derek's objections and attempts to paint Kevin as unstable. The custody battle was brutal. Vanessa and Derek had money for expensive lawyers who tried to argue that Kevin would be a bad father, that his emotional devastation over Vanessa's betrayal made him unfit. Kevin's attorney countered that Vanessa's willingness to lie about a miscarriage and conspire to deny Kevin his parental rights made her the unfit parent. Eventually, the court ruled in Kevin's favor. He was granted joint custody with visitation rights that would expand as the baby grew. The court also ordered that the baby's name be changed to include Kevin's last name so that his son would at least carry part of Kevin's identity. It's been 2 years since that horrible discovery. Kevin's son, who he insisted on calling by a different first name than Derek Jr. during his custody time, is now a toddler. Kevin has him every other weekend and on holidays, shares in decisions about his upbringing, and is fighting for expanded custody as the boy gets older. Kevin is a wonderful father, just as he always dreamed he'd be. He reads to his son, plays with him, treasures every moment they have together. But those moments are limited because of Vanessa's betrayal, because she'd rather have lied about a miscarriage than allow Kevin to be a full-time father. Vanessa married Derek shortly after the divorce was final. They're raising Kevin's son as their own when he's with them, though Kevin has made sure his son knows that Kevin is his real father. It's complicated and painful, and Kevin grieves daily for all the time with his son that Vanessa's lies cost him. The emotional damage Vanessa caused has been profound. Kevin struggles with trust in relationships. He's in therapy working through the trauma of being deceived so completely by someone he loved. He questions his judgment about people and wonders what signs he missed that Vanessa was capable of such cruelty. As for me, I learned several painful lessons from this experience. First, people are capable of weaponizing the things others care about most. Vanessa knew how desperately Kevin wanted to be a father, and she used that desperation to manipulate him. She let him grieve a fake loss while she planned to take his real child away from him. Second, trust but verify, even with family. If Kevin had insisted on going to the hospital with Vanessa, if he'd demanded to speak to the doctor himself, if he'd checked insurance records immediately, he might have discovered the lie sooner. Third, some betrayals can never be fully forgiven or recovered from. Kevin will always be scarred by what Vanessa did. His relationship with his son will always be complicated by the custody arrangement that resulted from her lies. Some damages are permanent. Fourth, document everything. Kevin's attorney was able to use Jennifer's social media posts as evidence of Vanessa's deception. Without that proof, Vanessa might have continued lying and gotten away with her plan. And finally, honey, the family courts sometimes work, but slowly and imperfectly. It took months of legal battles for Kevin to secure his parental rights to a child who was his from conception. He lost precious time with his newborn son because the system moved so slowly. My son told me his wife had miscarried, and I believed him because why wouldn't I? When I saw her baby bump photos on social media from the same week she supposedly lost the baby, I discovered a betrayal so calculated and cruel that it still takes my breath away. Vanessa didn't just lie about a miscarriage. She weaponized Kevin's grief, manipulated his deepest desire, and planned to permanently separate him from his child. She let him believe he'd lost his first baby while she celebrated that same baby with other people. Some lies reveal a darkness in people that can never be unseen. Vanessa showed Kevin exactly who she was, and he had to accept that the woman he'd married was capable of unimaginable cruelty. Kevin has his son now, at least part-time. He's building a relationship with a child who will grow up confused about why he has two houses and why his parents hate each other. He's making the best of a situation that should never have happened. But every day Kevin mourns the time he lost with his son's earliest months. Every day he grieves the betrayal that stole his dream of being a full-time father to his first child. Vanessa got to keep the baby, got to marry her wealthy lover, got to maintain partial custody despite her lies. She faced consequences, but not nearly enough to match what she'd done. And Kevin learned that the cruelest betrayals come from the people we trust most, the ones who know exactly where we're most vulnerable and exactly how to hurt us deepest. That gender reveal party photo was supposed to be a celebration. Instead, it became the evidence that exposed a betrayal and began a legal battle that may last years. Sometimes social media reveals truths people desperately wanted to keep hidden. And sometimes those truths, as painful as they are exactly what people need to see to protect themselves and the ones they love. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe to this channel for more true stories about family, betrayal, and survival. Have you ever discovered someone was lying to you through social media, or have you witnessed custody battles that broke your heart? Share your thoughts and experiences in the comments below. Your stories matter, and this community is here to support each other through the hardest times. And remember, when someone shows you who they really are, believe them the first time. Take care of yourselves, and I'll see you in the next story.